All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the Pie Shops podcast series, and I'd like to welcome everybody here. This is one in many that we're going to be doing, and we're trying to help our members as well as anybody else out there with their new business plans. And to get to that end, today's subject is going to be what every entrepreneur should know before starting a business. Now, we may not cover everything because that covers a lot of stuff, but there's some important things I think that everybody would be interested in. Today's podcast is supported by Blue Dolphin Design and Engineering Incorporated, serving the Central Valley, California for 2 decades with developing products and ideas. It's also supported by the Valley Community Small Business Development Center, which is for all of you who don't know, is a free resource for small businesses that you can use them for doing all sorts of development of your business related to just about anything, marketing, sales, whatever the case may be. And it's free service. And of course, the regional law firm of Coleman Horowitt, who is a real strong supporter of the Pie Shop here. To that end, I'd like to welcome Brandon Hamparzoomian. Nice to see you. Good to see you again.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Brandon, a little bit of background on Brandon. He's summa cum laude, California State Fresno graduate, Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy. Got his jurisprudential doctor at San Joaquin College of Law. And he's currently an associate in the transactions department of Coleman Horowitt. He represents companies and individuals in business transactions and general corporate governance. His practice includes business formation and dissolution, business restructuring, and mergers and acquisitions. Mr. Hamparzoomian also assists clients with their estate planning and wealth preservation, including business succession planning. So all sorts of important things related to stuff we're dealing with nowadays. So once again, welcome, Brandon. We're kind of covering a subject here that is near and dear to my heart because I've started a few businesses and gone through those struggles and wish I had known some things early on that I now know. Sure. And I know we discussed a little bit before that for the formation of business, when everything's just getting going, everybody's excited, everybody's working on their idea. They think they're going to make millions of dollars and have that big exit or that huge company. But, so there's a lot of exciting, nervous things going on there. But what are the kind of things I got to keep in mind, early on? What are
Sure.
they, what's important then?
Sure. And, of course, the podcast today, it's, focused on, advice that's applicable to the early stage of a business from, conception and formation all the way up to, not including, but all the way up to your Series A round, which would be your first big round of institutional financing, your venture capital round. And so in that early stage, those early phases, a lot of people have this conception that there are no legal issues or there's no legal matters to attend to. And they think that because from an outsider's perspective, you look inside the corporation or the business and there isn't a lot of cash or there's no cash, there's maybe no employees. Often it's just a few founders working out of their bedrooms, and, yes. and they think that what possible issues are there to attend to? There's no need to think about it. And right. The reality is that a lot of companies don't make it out of that first phase.
Sure.
And there's a lot of companies where it's inevitable, but there are some companies where they have the talent, they have a marketable idea or a marketable service, but because they're not putting in that planning, they're not putting thought into certain issues in that front end, these companies that would otherwise make it out of that first phase and scale, they end up failing.
Oh, interesting.
And that's always unfortunate. And so hopefully we can cover today is just issues that, that don't require you to go sit in a lawyer's office and spend a whole lot of money. These are just, practical things that you can just readily start thinking about and start applying.
Well, I know that, I like to say, and I have been through this a few times, the agreements aren't for when things are going good. They're for when there's a problem or there's a dispute over an interpretation or something like that. And it's just like a patent. That's when it matters. These agreements that's when they matter.
Yeah. A famous saying, an oral agreement is worth the paper that it's written on.
Very good. Yeah.
and so, of course, you want to have certain agreements in, but before you can have an agreement, you got to have some discussions. You have to have a plan. And I think that segues us right into a first topic. And before when you think of an idea for whether it's a product or a service, whatever it is, just coming up with even a basic plan. What are you going to be making? What are you going to be selling? How much is it going to cost? To be able to to bring it to market. Do you need do you have all the skills that you need right here, right now, or do you need to bring on a partner? How long is it going to take? Is this something that you can just get up and get going next week, or is this something that's going to take years? How much time are you going to have to quit are you willing to quit your day job for it? How much time? And so just coming up with that simple plan. Also thinking of, do you have any competitors? Are you in the proper market where there's going to be a demand for it? And coming up with that simple plan first before you go talk to a lawyer or talk to another advisor, or when you're trying to pitch it to a potential co-founder.
Sure.
When you have that plan there, it adds some legitimacy and it can help with goal setting.
I think that you bring up a good point. Thinking about where you're going to go with your idea. Often, one of the questions we ask these founders is, what is your plan? Do you want to just sell your idea to somebody else? Do you want to create an actual company? Do you want to manufacture this yourself?
Sure.
Do you want to license it to somebody else? Those are different pathways. They require different upfront thinking and doing.
And there is nothing wrong with always amending that plan. It can just be a fluid plan that always gets amended, but there always has to be some plan.
Yes.
And all the co-founders know, okay, for right now, this is the plan until it's amended again. And, this is the vision. These are the goals. These are the milestones.
I think it's important. A lot of business owners hear about creating a business plan, and not everybody does it. I believe that, number one, you have to realize a plan is just that. The minute you go to implement it, it will go wrong. So you have to be fluid, as you mentioned, and be flexible and be willing to revise it. But doing the plan in itself allows you to address all of the potential issues to some extent. That sometimes are incredibly important, sometimes not. But at least you look at them, even if they're going to change next week. You've taken some time to look at them.
Yeah, and a lot of time, like when people fail to plan, they end up making some mistakes. Like they end up bringing on co-founders they really didn't need, or they end up spending money they really didn't need to spend. And just there's some things that they're kind of hard to walk back on.
So very well, interesting. So I know that a lot of people, when they start off, they go, well, I need to incorporate because I need to protect myself, or I need to be in California, I need to be an LLC, or what do I need to do? So what do you think about?
Well, a question that I often get is, when should I incorporate? Not only why, but when. My philosophy is always, sooner rather than later. If you're still in the stage where you're not quite sure what you're going to be making, what you're going to be doing, if you're even going to do it at all, then of course don't incorporate. But once you get to the point where you are sure, it's all systems a go, and you want to start, you want to start going, you want to start. You want to start, whether it's coming up with a prototype or start. Building some things out, then, I would say that's the time to incorporate. I always recommend using some type of an entity, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. If you're a person all by yourself, and you start off, if you go into business by yourself, you're just a sole proprietorship, which is just you. It's not a separate entity. There's no limited liability protection. There is no separate entity that can, take the hit for any type of liability. It's just you. So you better make sure at the very least you have a whole bunch of insurance if you're going to do that.
Sure.
And same with if you and I were to go to into a business together, there's two or more of us, and so we'd be a general partnership by default. Again, we're both jointly and severally liable. Our personal assets are wide; it's open season on our personal assets. Sure. So I always say to incorporate with some type of entity, whether it's an LLC, which is a limited liability company, or a corporation. If you are the type, to make it real simple, if you're the type of company that you're a true startup, meaning that you have this huge market gap that you want to fill, you want to scale it really quickly, eventually seek big institutional investment, then I would say a C corporation is just the best way to go. With a limited liability company, just briefly, a limited liability company is a company that's owned by members, and it's managed by either all the members, or it can be manager managed, where those members will elect a manager to manage it for them. Okay. And so the manager is just the president, CEO. That's one way of doing it. LLCs are still relatively new. Corporations are still more popular, especially among startup companies. Very popular for good reason. A corporation is owned by the shareholders. So the founders, whether it's 1, 2, 3, they'll be those will be the shareholders. And then the shareholders will elect directors. Often it's the shareholders will elect themselves to be the director. Right. And then the directors run the long-term goals of the company. And then the directors appoint officers. And again, the same people will appoint themselves to the different officer positions. So,
corporation. So I am, of course, familiar with incorporating. I've done it a few times. Can you explain the difference between Subchapter S and a C corp?
Sure. It's a total tax issue. A C corporation, by default, all corporations are C corporations, and so they're taxed twice. You're gonna, as a shareholder, first the corporation pays a tax on all the income. And then once the corporation makes distributions to the shareholders, then the shareholders pay taxes on it as well. And so there's that double taxation. If you want to be an S corporation has to have fewer than 100 shareholders. All the shareholders have to be individuals. They all have to be United States citizens. So and if you meet those rules, kind of strict requirements, you can only have one class of stock. So you can't have preferred shares or any type of So it's for very small, simple, with simple capital structures. And then you can elect to be an S corporation, which is a pass-through entity. There's no taxation at the corporate level.
Right.
All the money just gets passed through to the shareholders.
Right.
And so if you are a company that's looking to start a business and just immediately start making money, and it's going to be your only job, and you just want to maintain it, keep it level and just have that be your income, then an S corporation makes a lot of sense. If you're the type of a startup that, you're willing to work on it for 3, 4, 5 years and not really make much money in the short run, but you're looking long term, you're looking to scale it, make it huge, bring on some institutional investors, and then eventually, sell it for something big, then a C corp.
Okay.
Because as soon as you bring on a venture capitalist or you bring on some institutional investor, the S corporation election is going to be gone anyway.
Ure. Right.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Interesting to know that. So, okay. So some of the other things to keep in mind, while you're sitting there going crazy trying to get your actual product out and get that thing developed, what other things do you want to keep in mind, reforming the business?
Well, another thing to keep in mind too is, some of the other benefits of incorporating. Something else to keep in mind is that once you incorporate, it creates a repository for all of your intellectual property or anything that you're developing. So if you don't have that corporation for everyone to assign their intellectual property into, you have a bunch of individuals working on separate different parts. And also having a corporation can add legitimacy. It creates it's an entity that can provide you with limited liability protection. And so moving on, to the question you had about other things to be thinking about is once you have founders, or whether it's yourself or especially if you have other people that are going to be co-founders with you, is coming up with a founders agreement, it's start with the real simple issues. What are our goals here? What are we really, what are our short-term goals, our long-term goals? What are our working styles? Am I thinking about putting in 50, 60 hours a week and I expect that out of you? And you think, oh, well, I'm only thinking about putting 30 in, trying to see what your work ethics are like, can you work together? Also thinking about, when it comes to equity allocation, when it comes time to, distribute the shares, who's taking what percent of the pie. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, I've had people come to me and say, hey, I'm the one that thought of the idea and I'm the one that got the team together. So I want 70% and the other founders are going to have 30%. Mm-hmm. And, I typically advise against that. Mm-hmm. I typically advise that it should be, the equity should be more or less equal. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because, again, they'll say, oh, over the last 3 months, I've been developing the prototype, or I thought of the idea. Well, all the work is ahead of you.
Sure.
And
good point.
And that's where the value is going to be built. And you might be thinking as a minority shareholder, you might think, oh yeah, he'll take 75, I'll take 25. That's fair. He's the one that thought of it. Well, after 4 years of toiling away,
right. Yeah.
And you're thinking, geez, this guy worked, 3 extra months out of 4 years. It's a drop in the ocean.
Sure. Yes.
And then so it could end up, and that's one of the things, nothing can kill a business faster than one founder thinking, this guy's not working hard enough, or this guy is making way more, and I want out. Right.
You bring up a good point, because I've been through this as a corporate owner. If you have to invest money into the business, then often. So you say, okay, I want to be 70% owner and you're 30%. Well, then when it comes time to pony up money, then you got to pony up 70% of the money. Yeah. So there's always the two sides of the story. If things aren't going so well and you have to come up with money to keep the business floating, you may not be so happy to have that 70%. Yeah. So why not spread the wealth as well as the debt,
Absolutely. And just knowing that, in the future when it comes to, making sure that there's a fair and equitable distribution, and more on founders agreements, agreeing on what everyone's duties are going to be, what's everyone good at, what does everyone bring to the table, sure. Making sure that there's some type of vesting agreement put in place for the shares. Mm-hmm. And with a vesting agreement, typically it would be, to use us as an example, if we started a corporation, typical vesting schedule is, we'll both pay for all of our shares. Let's say I have 1 million shares, you have 1 million shares. And we're both going to pay the money for all of our shares, but all of our shares aren't going to vest, at the time that we pay for them. Mm-hmm. They'll vest over the course of 4 years, each month, each month, 1/48 of those shares will vest each and every month.
Sure.
And how that works is, throughout the whole time that the shares are vesting, we can always vote all of our shares. But let's say that after a year, I decide that I want to leave. Mm-hmm. 25% of my shares will have vested.
Right.
But the other 75% will be unvested, and then the corporation can buy those shares back at the issue price,
right,
which is usually just literally a few bucks.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so that prevents me that, let's say after a year, I get frustrated, I get lazy, mm-hmm. I end up becoming just a horrible employee, mm-hmm. And I quit, or you have to fire me, or whatever it is. I can't say, okay, great, that's fine. I'm just going to walk away and hold my equity hostage.
Yeah, sure, right.
And force you to buy me out at fair market value,
right,
or at some ridiculously high price.
Right.
And so making sure that people are incentivized to work hard for 4 or 5 years, whatever, sure, it is. But also we both know that if one of us leaves, the business isn't going to be decimated.
Right.
The remaining co-founders can pay the person out and keep going forward. And how many businesses I've seen just in the early stages don't have vesting put in place, and some guy gets frustrated or becomes a jerk and is basically able to taunt the other co-founders and say, hey, look, I want this much amount of money for my shares. I know the company isn't worth that much. I know the company hasn't made any money, but if you want me out, and how many people have just had to fold up because of that?
You bring up a very good point. Along with that, and once again, I've been through some of these issues.
Yeah.
But, there are also other issues that you may not even think are pertinent. For example, you have a partner that passes away or something happens to them.
Yes.
Well, do you just want the company going to his spouse or his kids? And they may not know anything about what's going on. So these are things that probably should be, you don't want this to happen. Nobody wants this to happen, but you should probably lay it out, right?
I always build it out. I always have all my startups, they always have vesting, always have share vesting, and there's always some right of first refusal. So if a founder passes away, the corporation has a right of first refusal to, if they want to go to the kids or the wife or whoever else is designated in the will or the estate plan. The corporation has the right to buy those shares and bring them back to the corporation, and then the corporation can issue them out to. But the corporation can say, hey, we want to have control. Basically, the point is, the corporation wants to retain control over and making sure that equity doesn't end up in the hands of someone that is just
an uninterested party.
An uninterested party, or just someone that just absolutely the founders could not get along with.
Sure, that's important.
And so you always want to have like a right of first, and you don't need a lawyer to have that conversation. Just getting around a table and saying, hey, if one of us passes away, if one of us has to move to a different country unexpectedly, if one of us gets frustrated, if one of us wants to go get our MBA. And if we have to leave, what's going to happen? What's fair to everybody? Yeah. And it's a tough conversation, but I always advise people, because I have sometimes founders say, that's going to be a tough conversation. And if it's going to be that tough a conversation, that's maybe a hint that there's some underlying trust issues.
Oh, yeah.
And it's definitely a broken record. I hear this all the time. Oh, we've known each other for so long. We don't need anything like that. Yeah. That is a broken record. I hear it all the time.
Yeah. Well, so I'm sure everybody's listening here. They're absorbing a lot of this, but you also might be beginning to realize that this is not a simple matter. There probably ought to be an attorney involved who can understand the proper way to set up a legal document. And additionally, if somebody else, one of your other partners, has his attorney write up the document, you probably should have your own attorney, or get your own attorney, or somebody you trust who's an attorney, to look over it from your standpoint. Because they can be skewed, and it may not be obvious. And the way the law works, from my experience, is not always obvious to people, and it's important to understand those nuances.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we were talking about intellectual property. We briefly touched on that. I'm going to be clear on a certain point here, and you can help me out with this. I believe the way it works with a patent is, if I and another inventor file for the patent, and both of our names are on the patent, we both have equal rights, full rights to that patent, even though some people may think, well, there's two of us, it must be 50-50. The reality is, as co-inventors, you both have equal rights to do with that patent as you wish, even if it's not the same thing. Additionally, you talked about a corporation owning the patent. I think, especially in that situation, having the corporation own the patent helps define, as an entity, what happens and who controls that patent.
Yes, absolutely. With in addition to a vesting agreement, attached to that always is something called that I always use. It's called a confidential information and inventions assignment agreement, which is to address that very problem. Yeah. That if co-founders have something that's been patented, or way before they've gotten it patented, if they're just working on it, if they're working on a prototype and they're developing ideas, there's drawings, there's some build outs of it. If we're not incorporated, and even if we are incorporated, if we haven't assigned all of our right, title, and interest in that intellectual property to the corporation, if one of us, just leaves,
yes,
we could potentially be taking our interest with us.
Yes.
And then a lot of people don't realize that. And I just had a case, not a case, but a matter recently where, someone had worked on the company for years. And, this person had some help. Every now and then people would kind of come, like he had, kind of like contractors and employees just come in and out and help out. And then when it came time for him to finally go seek some investment, he wanted to go seek, almost $1 million, from an inventor. It was discovered that, that unbeknownst to me, that, he had all these other people touching, or working on the project and had never signed any type of confidentiality and assignment agreement. And so we had to go back to all those people and get them to assign,
or not,
or I know that they were all able, we were able to do that, but we all got them to acknowledge that, they never had any type of interest in it, because, that's the first thing an investor is going to do. Any investor, worth their salt is going to look through and make sure that what's all the intellectual property, and does the corporation own all of it?
Yes.
Does the corporation and if the corporation doesn't, then can you satisfy us?
Right.
Can you get it done and prove it to us?
Right. Sure.
And so I absolutely think that, like when you have a bunch of co-founders in their own little worlds working on a piece of the project, owning their own little interests, that's not really a company.
No,
that's more
not conducive to getting things done.
Yeah, and so you want to be very, very clear where there's no dispute of, I own 20% or 30%, I own half. I've been doing this. It doesn't matter how much anyone's been working, how hard anyone's been working or not. It's all a corporate asset.
Sure, yeah.
And hey, if you're thinking, hey, I kind of don't want to, I don't feel comfortable, assigning it to the corporation. Well, if you don't, whether it's because you don't believe in your co-founders, you don't trust the corporation, well then, hey, maybe that's an indicator that, hey, maybe you don't want to go in with these other people.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
And so having these conversations, having these thoughts, it really it really kind of go with your gut a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Whether it's something that you feel comfortable doing, or whether it's something you should do.
All the more reason for trying to, when it's at least peaceful, go through and create an agreement that you can all agree to, that you can all come up with.
Sure.
And because when it's not peaceful, it can get pretty ugly and not a lot of fun.
Unnecessarily ugly.
Yeah, unnecessarily, exactly.
And expensively.
Yes. Yeah, expensive. Yes. It could have just been spelled out in the beginning. And, you can go through the agreement and it's spelled out in the beginning. Then people don't even start thinking down a path that's going to take them to litigation or something.
Exactly. And
they just say, well, this is the way it's spelled out. This is what we have to live with. Yeah. Or they negotiate something different. Yeah. But at least it's understood from the beginning. Yeah. And that's definitely one of the things that I've learned over the many years of being an entrepreneur. And I've learned this through some hard lessons. That doing this up front and having some good legal, advice in the background is really an important thing. And you may not want to spend the money, but it's one of those things, like you said, you get what you pay for.
But on that note too, a lot of these documents, this vesting agreement, the confidential information and inventions assignment agreement, the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, all these documents, are pretty, more or less generic. These are not complex, sophisticated documents. That these are routine documents that that we crank out for our companies. We of course go through each and every one of them, make sure that that it fits the company, but they're more or less generic documents, and that they're not insanely expensive, and they work wonders. They help the company weather so many storms,
Sure.
and they prevent so many problems. They help you get to that point, to that Series A point, or they help you be able to deal with problems. And issues are inevitable, but they help you to quickly, easily, efficiently deal with these problems. I there's just certain things like that I just highly recommend that you get in place. It's the easiest thing.
I agree. It's also the thing, as I mentioned, that's most overlooked, that people just don't pay attention to enough. And it is part of the purpose of the Pie Shop to try to bring this to people's attention and to help them through this process. That's why Coleman and Horowitt is a functional and resource for the members, because of the value that can be brought by this and make your life easier throughout the process. I should mention that members of the Pie Shop, we do have an agreement with Coleman and Horowitt where they get, we have special rates and things like that through Coleman and Horowitt, which is really pretty fantastic. And when you're a startup and you're worried about spending money, especially this kind of money, and people are always concerned about hiring a lawyer, that it's nice to know that there's some help out there for getting some of this figured out, that you have competent people, and that you can pay a reasonable price, and then have peace of mind that this is sitting there and covering your back and not having to worry about what happens when things go wrong. It's nice to have. Yeah,
and when it comes to documents like this, I definitely wouldn't. If anyone is concerned that it's gonna cost a whole lot of money and things like that, I wouldn't let that be a reason to not talk to a lawyer. There are a lot of lawyers that when it comes to these organizational documents, they understand. Especially if you go to a firm that works with a lot of startups, they understand that a lot of startups don't have any money to spend, and so a lot of firms will do kind of a lot of this incorporation work and will defer a lot of the fees until the company raises that first round of money to pay back the legal fees. And so a lot of firms that again are geared towards startups and they know what startups can be, and they know the type of legal work that it can produce in the future. They're not going to say, oh well, we're not even going to help you get off the ground because you can't afford the couple thousand or whatever it is. If you go to a firm that that does a lot of startup work, they understand.
Oh, the whole idea is to be integrated with the company, and as the company grows, their needs grow, then the law firm hopefully is part of who they think about.
That's exactly what startup work is all about. Yeah, that's from a legal perspective. I'm in it for the long haul.
Sure, excellent. And most startups should be. And if you're thinking through all this stuff, this is definitely one of the aspects. So any other things that you'd like to add here? Things that I would add, just general housekeeping stuff. If you're an LLC or a corporation, make sure that if you have a personal bank account and a corporate bank account, make sure they're separate. Don't go taking the family out to eat and then say, oh, I forgot my debit card, I'll just use the corporate card. Don't go thinking, okay, I got to pay an invoice for the corporation, I don't have my corporate card, but I got my personal debit card. Don't be commingling assets. Treat those corporate formalities with the utmost respect. Keep yourself separate from the company. Make sure that you're, make sure that you're having proper board meetings, things are being properly resolved. Make sure that all of the agreements you sign, whether they be share issuance agreements, contracts with independent contractors, make sure that you always keep, signed copies. Sign them, scan them in, put them in a shared Dropbox. Nothing looks more amateurish than when it's time to go get some investment and the investors, they give me all your documents, and you turn over documents that are missing signature pages because you lost the originals, or they're missing dates, or they're there's it's like, oh we did sign a thing, but I lost it. So just keeping things in order, and just make sure that you're being respecting the corporate formalities, keeping separate accounts. You're paying your taxes. You're using QuickBooks. There's a lot of online applications to help you with your taxes and withholdings and things like that. Make sure you're doing that properly.
before you start employing people and independent contractors, employees. Make sure you understand the difference between an independent contractor and an employee.
And those laws I know have changed recently.
There's a case called Dynamex Operations versus Superior Court. It's a case from the California Supreme Court, a landmark case that made it in this state significantly harder to classify someone as an independent contractor versus an employee. And so before you get into employment matters, think I can save a whole bunch of money by just calling them independent contractors. Make sure that before you really get to that next step, that when you get into these milestones and you're going to start employing people, you're going to venture out into these new milestones. Make sure that any new legal issues you're really thinking clearly about, and if you have any doubt about it, just getting some quick advice on it, because sometimes, like for example with the employment, independent contractor versus employee, a misclassification could just be it can be expensive, it can be bad.
Sure. And then people ought to pay attention to this. I know the laws have recently changed, and who you thought it was simple to hire somebody as an independent contractor, nowadays there's that line's has been pushed quite a ways, and you probably should have that person as an employee in most cases, it seems like. So anyways, another reason to contact somebody who has knowledge about this stuff.
So I'd say just the overall theme is to always have a plan, always be getting together with your co-founders, get agreements in writing, get those those duties, those responsibilities, get them in writing. Always feel free to amend the plan, but always have one, and keep good housekeeping policies, keeping everything nice and clean. And then, that will help you get out of that first phase.
Sure.
And you won't become one of those companies that had the talent, had the people, had the idea, but nevertheless, because of a failure to plan or just a failure to do some due diligence, you unfortunately don't make it out.
Sure.
That's always sad. But unfortunately, it's a part of my practice is having to watch that happen sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I've been involved with groups who've been through investments and also been privy to many pitches. And one thing you got to keep in mind is you're dealing with smart people, and they're going to want to know that when they give you their money, that you got your ducks in a row. And it includes not just your idea and not just marketing it, but that your team's in place and that you have the legal stuff behind it all in place. It may not have to be perfect, but you really need to spend some time working on these things. And part of your team can be a good law firm and help you launch, help you get there.
Yeah, so, and we're always available.
Yeah,
that's at least one of my slogans, that we're always available. So anyone has any questions, and if there's anything I didn't cover or didn't go deep enough in, I'm always available. I'm always happy to hear about entrepreneurs, hear about their ideas, hear about their aspirations, and then letting them know what makes sense for them to do at this point.
All right. Well, good. Hopefully you guys got something out of today's podcast. I know I did, and I'm sure actually probably most of you did too. I really appreciate you coming in, Brandon.
Thank you so much.
Good information. And always good seeing you. Once again, you can obviously contact Brandon at Coleman Horowitt. Mm-hmm. They're here in Fresno, California. Also, please, you can check this podcast will be on the Pie Shop's website, which is the Pie Shop, THEPISHOP.org, thepieshop.org. And you can view this podcast and our other podcasts there. And we are definitely looking for good members. We like to call them product entrepreneurs, to apply and become part of this organization and have people like Coleman Horowitt and Brandon here to help you be more successful. So glad you guys all tuned in, and we'll see you at our next podcast. Thank you very much.